Katyal, the analysis reporting in the Times makes clear that Trump on tape acknowledging that he had items that hadn't been declassified by him or anybody else could potentially blow a hole through all of the public defenses. Now, as Mike's saying, there may be other legal defenses. It seems to always boil down to this stupid and chaotic defense if the past is prologue. But what do you make of what is known to be evidence that Jack Smith has put before the grand jury?
Well, Nicole, I have to say that classified documents about Iran are pretty high up on the list of things that you don't want to lose at a country club. And I'm going to say something here that I don't think I'll ever generally say. I disagree with Mike, and I agree with Bill Barr. That is to say that I think actually this is not a hard case to prove, this prosecution. And if anything, it's easier to make a case against Trump than it is against others because Trump is his own worst enemy when it comes to his legal troubles. He opens his mouth in all sorts of ways that implicate him even further. So I don't think Mike is right when he says the question here is whether or not they can find this document about Iran. They're already found more than 100 classified documents and sensitive documents at Mar-a-Lago after they swore that Trump had turned over everything. So whether or not they find this document or not, that's not what the prosecution is going to be based on. The relevance of this whole story and this tape is not for the document itself. It goes to Trump's state of mind. The defense that he's been articulating ever since the search on Mar-a-Lago is, I declassified this stuff in my mind. I had a standing order when I took stuff out of the White House. It was automatically declassified. Now, that argument has always struck me as bogus, but here you have Donald Trump on tape saying it's bogus, saying, look, there's a document I took out of the White House, and that document is classified, therefore I can't show it to you. That blows a hole in the defense. So that's why I think it's relevant. And I think the question about whether this document can be found or not, whether Trump exerted incompetence with respect to that document or, mishandled that document, that's an interesting question. Prosecutors, of course, should get to the bottom of it. But the real point is they found the goods. They found more than 100 classified documents at his house after he swore they didn't. And his one defense that he's been articulating ever since the search is now contradicted by his own words. It's as if Donald Trump is too dumb to even play dumb, which was his defense.
Let me show you. Interestingly, Neil, he has never said, I don't have this document. He's never said, I don't have classified materials. He's never said, I kept things I shouldn't have kept. I mean, he doesn't deny the aspects of the conduct that are described as the crimes under investigation, all the way up to and including the Espionage Act. Did you show it to anyone? Not really. That's his answer to, dissemination, which puts him in some danger under the letter of the Espionage Act. Let me play you another attempt that he made in an edited broadcast by Fox News last night. So we don't know if this was even the whole answer, but here's some of his answer to Sean Hannity about this document specifically.
The third issue is there's a special counsel that's appointed, and news broke yesterday that there might be a tape recording that, quote, where you acknowledge that you understood that these were classified documents. First of all, do you know who this call may be with? Do you know anything about it?
No, I don't know anything about it. All I know is this. Everything I did was right. We have the Presidential Records Act, which I abided by 100%. Biden has 1,850 boxes with a lot of classified stuff that he's not supposed to have in his case. I have the right to declassify as president.
Again, the misdirection. I mean, the call was with Mark. These aren't mysterious facts. They've been all over the news for 2 days. The call was with the recording was for an autobiography that Mark Meadows was drafting. It was his ghostwriter. He's on the tape. He's not secretly recorded. He's crinkling a piece of paper. And it seems that he's missing what endangers him, which is that he, in his own voice, and we just saw in the E. Jean Carroll trial, that in his own voice, copying to believing that for a million years you could grab women between the legs because that's what famous people do, and that that's still his position today. What he's copying to in all of these taped appearances is not a denial that he took classified information, and there's never a denial that he obstructed the government's efforts to have the classified material made secure again.
That's exactly right, Nicole. And that is his entire answer last night. I had to suffer through that and watch that thing. And yeah, you've got it exactly right. I mean, you know, I used to be National Security Advisor at the Justice Department. I handled these kinds of documents all the time. And I can tell you, when someone asks you, did you ever disseminate a piece of classified information? You darn well know who you talk classified information with and who you didn't. It's not the kind of thing you forget and say, not really, or something like that. If this were any other person and they had admitted to what Donald Trump's already admitted to, they'd be in jail. This is not a hard case. And that is why, ultimately, I think the trajectory of this investigation, based on everything we know and how the case gets stronger and stronger with new pieces of information, makes it very hard for Jack Smith to do anything else but to indict. Because if it were anyone else, there would be an indictment already.
Michael Steele, I want to bring you in on this. On the town hall, what was broadcast was not broadcast live. That's all I meant. And there's some opportunity for any news organization taking something that's pre-taped to make edits. We don't have any information that they edited this particular section, but we don't know what his full answer was. But to Neil's point, it never really changes. He says, I had the Presidential Records Act. Presidential Records Act isn't like a pocket pardon for mishandling classified documents.
No, it's not at all. But before I address it, I just have to give a drop the mic moment to my man Neil for the key analysis of Donald Trump. Too dumb to play dumb. It was such a perfect assessment of everything we've known from 2015 to the present. So here we are. In this moment, watching this recording with Sean, and folks actually, from a political perspective, taking this seriously and being concerned about what the outcome of this may mean for Trump, what this may mean for Republicans. Trump doesn't care about any of that. As Sean asked the question, the answer was already forming on his lips before he finished the question, and that is, he genuinely believes, too dumb to recognize the truth here, that he has the authority to just do whatever he wants with classified information. And the problem is that there is nobody inside the Republican political or legislative class, all right, who've said to him, no, you don't. The Congress wrote the law. I mean, this is not something, the presidents didn't write the Espionage Act. Members of Congress wrote the law. They set the parameters, and they put the limit on the president's ability to just wake up in the middle of the night and think, oh, you know what, I'm going to declassify that document on Iran. It's declassified, and go back to sleep. That's just not how it works. And so, but Trump persists in this, and there is no relevant pushback on it. So what that means is that when the hammer comes down on this, you're going to have a significant population of people out there who are going to think Donald Trump is getting screwed again, that Donald Trump has the authority to do what he did with those documents. And so we find ourselves having these very erstwhile and important legal discussions around the ramifications of these actions. But the political consequences when it comes time to how the American people are digesting this, because as a recovering lawyer, I can tell you they digest politics better than they digest the law. They're just not going to be on the same page. And that's one of the problems we have here. No matter how much we try to spell it out and break it down, you have forces that are greater than us here who are reinforcing the BS coming out of Donald Trump's mouth. Sean didn't push back on that. How do we know? Well, we didn't see it. Now, I'm sure they didn't edit it out if he did, right? Maybe they did. But that says to me there was no way. Wait a minute, Mr. President, you're misreading the law here. and you know who was on the phone call. So tell us who was on the phone call. So that's the problem we have in this space right now, Nicole. Despite the incredible reporting by Mike and the legal analysis by Neil, you're still stuck in a political quagmire where a lot of people think Donald Trump is getting screwed here.